Hey there, it's Bob Buckley with another Frontline Disc Golf form review. Today we're going to be doing a backhand review for Doug. We got Doug here on the right, we got Dan Brooks-Walls on the left. I'm going to play through the form once, and then I'll back it up and review. Okay, so I always start this off by reminding people to slow down. Speed does not equal distance. Doug's speed is pretty similar to Dan's, so he's at a pretty good speed. The important part about being slow is that when we're having a bad day or we're making mistakes, it's way easier to recognize and pinpoint where in your form you're having an issue if you are slower. When we have a really fast run up, it's very difficult to pinpoint what the issue is. So with that said, I'll go through with review. The first issue I see, so I didn't put this in the notes over here, but Doug has this down by his belly button. Could afford to, I mean, it's not super low. I see some people with it down by their waist, but kind of want to get that up by our chest. If you see Dan, he's got his disc up here by his chest already. So other than that, the first issue I see is with this right here, the second step of his X step. He's landing on his toe and his foot is perpendicular to his dominant foot. What this does is it turns our hips and it doesn't allow us full engagement of the hips. If you notice Dan's X step, he lands on his toe, but his foot isn't completely perpendicular to his other foot. It's almost parallel to the other foot. So what this does is it allows Dan is about 30 degrees of rotation, and his shoulders are still able to stay at 90 degrees. What happens when you land on your toe is it automatically turns those hips and doesn't allow us to engage fully. Next thing I look at is I look at the reach back timing. So your reach back should begin as your dominant foot comes out of your X step. They should move at about the same speed in opposite directions. So that looks good. Peak reach back is when the foot touches down to the ground, which is also good. One thing I do notice here about Doug's reach back is that he's curling his wrist. I can no longer see the disc. You don't want to do that. There's no need to. The disc, your wrist will curl itself if you're doing the power pocket appropriately. The other thing I notice is that Doug looks away from the target way too soon. So as we see Doug here, he's looking at the target. He is now not looking at the target. He's starting to turn his head early. If you notice Dan on the left, he's looking at his target and his head stays looking at the target until this shoulder here pushes his chin. This left arm here, we want to see that down more compact. There's a couple different ways that people do it. I've had people put their hand in their back pocket. I don't really recommend it, but if you're really having a hard time breaking the habit, it works. Dan keeps his arm up but close to the body. Garrett Gurthie has his arm over his head. Paul McBeth likes to make a fist and his arm comes down on the inside of his left leg. So main goal is to stay more compact. Staying more compact is going to allow us to rotate faster. It's going to allow us to rotate cleaner. So back to the X step. Doug's final step of the X step. We see here that Doug's feet are what I call pigeon-toed. This doesn't allow us to engage our hips fully. We want to think of it as like a baseball swing. When you take that step to swing a baseball bat, we land on our toe, and then we pivot to our heel. So as you watch Dan's here on the left, notice that he lands on his toe, his back foot is here, his front foot is here. So he's not exactly pigeon-toed. His knee is facing inward. It's going to allow him to fully engage his hips. So Doug's head is also coming around too soon as he begins his pull through. He's almost pushing his shoulder with his chin, which is not what we want to see, because we want to see those shoulders stay lined up with our target as long as possible. If you look at Dan here, Dan's shoulders are still lined up with the target. And even through his throw, as Dan lets the disc grip out of his hand here, Dan's shoulders are still lined up at his target. As we look at Doug's release, we notice that Doug's arm compared to his shoulders is not lined up, which makes it harder to get a consistent release. Sometimes you may release here, sometimes you may release here, sometimes you may release here. So if we're aligning our throw so that we can only release when our arm matches our shoulder, we should be able to hit tighter gaps. Also, what happens when you open your shoulders too soon is it doesn't allow you to get into that power pocket. Now, I remind you earlier I said that you don't need to curl your wrist because it'll happen if you're doing the power pocket properly. So as we watch Dan, you'll see that his arm here makes sort of a triangle. This is what we like to call the power pocket. This is where Dan's wrist is going to curl itself. He's going to get all of his spin and all of his power by getting his elbow out away from his body. I like to pretend that there's a sheet of glass here, that Dan is trying to break the sheet of glass with his elbow. As we go back and we look at Doug's, Doug never gets that triangle. Doug never gets that triangle because he's opening up his shoulders too soon. It also looks like Doug's weight is a little bit backwards. As you'll see, Dan's weight completely shifts to that front foot. And at the time of his getting into the power pocket, he's off of his back foot. So yeah, make sure that you are getting that elbow out away from your body and breaking the glass and keeping those shoulders perpendicular, lined up with that target. That's all I got for you. Hopefully you'll learn for it. Hopefully you'll learn from it. Hopefully it helps you grow. Appreciate you watching.